Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody is having a nice week so far. First show of the week. Been kind of crazy. I had to drive across the state and back for some family obligations. Always a bit of a process in the winter. I got to spend a little bit of time on the Western Slope, though, which I am a big fan of. I think it's some of the most underrated views in the state. But nice to be back because we've got a lot going on. I've got just an insane schedule coming up over the next month between CSU basketball and conference tournament and the Avalanche, and then the NCAA tournament. Got my NCAA tournament credentials approved for the games in Denver, which I'm excited about. So a lot happening. I'm going to have a lot to talk about here over these next couple of weeks. We've got a fun show planned for you today. Here at the beginning, we are going to talk about Ross Dellenger's report from last night of Yahoo Sports. According to him, sources have told him that the Pac-12 and Mountain West conferences have begun mediation in regards to the exit fees and the poaching penalties for the 5 departing teams from the league. Those, of course, CSU, Boise State, Utah State, San Diego State, and Fresno State. After that, we're going to get into CSU Air Force takeaways. Another dominant second half from the Rams. It was a bit of a slow start. I think everybody at the break was feeling a little bit frustrated. I mean, CSU was just sloppy out of the gate, way too many turnovers, only a 1-possession game, just not what we wanted to see. But a very resilient performance in the end and a crucial road win, the 6th of the season. After that, we'll kind of get into some of the tiebreaker possibilities and all of that. There's a real opportunity that the Mountain West is going to end with 4 15-5 teams. And if that's possible, it could potentially work out not in CSU's favor, depending on how these next 2 weeks go. We'll kind of run through those scenarios. They at very minimum have a day 1 bye, which is crucial. You're going to finish top 5, but they could finish as high as 2nd or as low as 5th, depending on how these tiebreakers shake out. And again, we'll get into that in the end. If you've got any questions, comments our way, throw them in the Toyota chat. We'll get to those at the end and throughout the show as well. Good morning to everybody rocking with us. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up on the old YouTube, I certainly would appreciate it. Let's just get into it. I feel like we've set the scene pretty well. But if you missed it last night, Ross Dellenger of Yahoo Sports, who really is locked into a lot of this conference realignment stuff, I believe he was who broke the news regarding the departing Pac-12 schools in the first place. I think he also broke the lawsuit news that CSU and Utah State and now Boise State has since joined the suit, filed back in the fall against the Mountain West. All of this, of course, comes down to the potential poaching penalties of, $55 million for those 5 departing schools, and of course the exit fees, which come out to like roughly $18 million per school. If they were to pay the entirety of that, it would be, 150 plus million. From the beginning, I've been pretty open that I have anticipated some type of settlement coming. Now, the fact that they're mediating right now, or they're going to mediation, it doesn't guarantee that there will be a settlement, but it certainly makes it much more likely. I do want to add that I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a legal expert. I've done my best to be as informed as possible through all this, listening to people that are more sourced than myself, people that are smarter than myself, especially when it comes to, the legalities and all the nuance of that. I still feel like there's a lot that's pretty relatively unknown, at least publicly. So there's a lot that's going to factor into this behind the scenes. I'm not trying to sit here and act like some know-it-all. Like, I know all the answers. Obviously, I cover CSU. I've covered the Mountain West for a decade. Going back to last fall, I had talked about how basically everything that I had heard behind the scenes was that Washington State and Oregon State intended to rebuild the Pac-12. Obviously, that process has come to fruition, and it's been complicated. There's a lot of factors at play here. There's a lot of emotion, depending on if you're a departing school, if you're one of these schools that is going to the Pac-12, you feel one way about this potential lawsuit and how it's all going to play out. If you are a fan of, say, Wyoming or New Mexico, you're obviously going to feel a lot different about all of that. And I try and be conscientious of that as best as I can. Obviously, this is a CSU show, so we're leaning into that angle of things. We're really excited about the possibility of what could be with this new Pac-12, but there have been some extenuating circumstances here that have kind of been lingering over it. We need some type of resolve in terms of what's going to happen here with these poaching penalties and the exit fees. If you missed it, CSU, Utah State, and now Boise State, which has joined the lawsuit, they basically contend that even though they've publicly announced they're going to the Pac-12, they have not formally given the Mountain West a notice of departure. They intend to be in the league through the previously agreed to grant of rights. Because of that, even though they have publicly announced that they're going to the Pac-12, they're saying we're still full voting members of the league. And the Mountain West has been having secret meetings, without the departing teams, without the 5 schools that are leaving. They allege that, there's been some collusion between the remaining schools and, secretly changing bylaws, that type of stuff. They talked about Gloria Nevarez incentivizing, Nevada or UNLV and Air Force to stay, and like some shadiness there. Again, I'm not a legal expert. I can't tell you, for certain, oh, this is going to hold up or this is going to get thrown out or what. But people a lot smarter than me have been, kind of speculating that there might be some basis for some of these to get thrown out. And that's why I always kind of felt like in the end, some type of settlement would be where we end up. Like, the likelihood of these schools just leaving and not paying a single dollar, that doesn't feel very high to me. I also feel like it's incredibly unlikely that the Mountain West collects what they hope to collect, $150 million. If you're a supporter of one of these Mountain West schools, you're probably sitting here shaking your head being like, why would the Mountain West agree for a penny less? And the reason they would is you run the risk of coming away with nothing if you lose in court. And again, I don't think it's necessarily a guarantee. I know there's contracts in place, all of that. The Pac-12 schools, Oregon State and Washington State, they did initially agree to these poaching penalties. They'll argue they were under duress, so they'll try and get those, thrown out. CSU, Utah State, they're arguing they shouldn't have to pay exit fees at all. Likelihood you negotiate it down. Neither side wants to sit here tied up in court for years and years on end, because neither side has the time for that. With 2026, rapidly approaching, both schools kind of have an incentive to come to a conclusion here so that they have an opportunity to move on. Now, the Mountain West has done a good job of backfilling. They didn't have a ton of great options in terms of who they could go out and get and add to the equation here, but they've kept the league alive. And I credit Gloria Nevarez in that regard, that she's been able to kind of hold it together here. But it is going to be interesting to see how all of this shakes out, because, if you're the Mountain West, if you promised, upwards of $30 million to Air Force and UNLV to be the flagships of your conference and stick around, it has been reported, and I've read the grant of rights, so I've seen it with my own eyes. The schools that intend to stay in the Mountain West, Air Force, UNLV, Wyoming, etc., all the new schools, they have signed a grant of rights through 2032. But based on what I've read in it, and again, this is my interpretation, I'm not a lawyer, a lot of it seems contingent on at minimum 61 million in those fees being delivered to the Mountain West schools by July 1st of 2026. And, I think there's some room there. Like if it doesn't end up being that sum, but they fight and, they give them the majority of it, then they're probably good. But what happens here if the Mountain West cannot deliver the money that they promised to these schools? And now at that point, do like Air Force and UNLV turn around and sue the Mountain West and try and get out? There's a lot of moving parts here, and ultimately, I think it's why there's a real incentive for these schools to figure it out. I will say at this point, with the grant of rights being signed, it does feel unlikely to me that UNLV or Air Force end up in the Pac-12. I guess you can never say never, but to me, it seems like Texas State, Memphis, Tulane, UTSA, all the schools we floated a million times. Those are the more likely options. And obviously, if you're the Pac-12, you have a real incentive here to try and reduce the payments as much as possible, if not get them completely thrown out. That's probably wishful thinking, but the exit fees for those AAC schools are pretty drastic. So like if you want to go get a Memphis, it would be nice if you have, an extra 50, 75, whatever, however many millions it ends up being to play with here. That's going to be huge. I do think with a school like Texas State, you're probably hoping to get them more on the cheap, but any of those other schools, it's going to take some money, and it's probably going to take the Pac-12 footing at least some of, if not all of, the bill to make that happen. If you're the Mountain West, you can't risk getting nothing. Then this whole thing could fall apart. It's going to be really interesting to see how this all pans out. Based on all the reports, it does seem like we should get a media deal announced soon for the Pac-12, which is a huge step. And then from there, you probably find out at least one expansion member, if not more, and then with more to come down the line. The lawsuits, though, and the media deal are big steps. And for those to ultimately get where we want to be, which is a full conference and, able to compete in football, basketball, all that, you've got to get through these steps first. And that was really long-winded. I don't know if I explained that quite as well as I intended to. A lot of moving parts here, but basically, like to get to the conclusion, like these are the key steps in the process. And we always knew that. We knew that the media deal would get announced likely before the new members of the Pac-12, because the media or the new members of the Pac-12 are going to be contingent on what type of media deal they get. And the media deal, like they know who they're going after. But we're going to get some answers here in the near future, which is pretty exciting. There's a lot that could happen. I've seen a lot of people on the Mountain West side say, oh man, like this could potentially lead to a merger. I just don't see it happening at this point. Again, you can never say never, but if they didn't want to do it before, I really have a hard time seeing Oregon State and Washington State agree to, bring over UTEP and Northern Illinois and all these other schools. Like they didn't want anything to do with Nevada or San Jose State, and now they're going to agree to be in a league with, UC Davis and other sports and UTEP and all these schools. It just seems far-fetched for me. I think we get some type of settlement. I think the Mountain West and the Pac-12 ultimately go their separate ways and we get past all this, but a lot's going to happen over these next couple of weeks. And ultimately, I think what happens with these fees, millions of dollars here at stake, is kind of the biggest factor in how all of this plays out. If the Pac-12 were to get all of this thrown out, now all of a sudden you've got money to burn. Like you could go get anybody you wanted at that point. But even getting, 50 plus million of it reduced would just be such a huge win when you're going to need some money to play with here in the coming years. So going to be interesting. Going to be interesting for sure. We're going to move on. We're going to talk CSU Air Force. At the end, we might come back around at the end of the show, kind of talk about who some of the teams that could be in play. I mean, we've talked about it a million times, but if you want to throw anybody out there, talk about the pros and cons, we certainly can. We're going to get into some takeaways here from the Air Force win for CSU men's basketball. Goodness, getting tongue tied. And then we'll kind of talk about, the possibilities at play here down the stretch. Real quick, do want to shout out a couple of our partners, though. I want to shout out our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is making it easier than ever to get tickets to all your favorite events. Recently, Game Time introduced an awesome new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to your favorite events that much easier. Filters out all the fluff to show you only the best of the best. The thing about Game Time, they have such an insane assortment of tickets that they offer. It can almost be overwhelming at times. Like, they've got concerts and comedy and theater and obviously sports, anything you're into, they've got it, and they've got more than anybody out there. But if you're in a hurry, it might be a little bit overwhelming. You're trying to be like, man, is this a great seat? The price is good, but is it a good value just because it's a terrible view? Or, is it cheap because somebody's just getting rid of it with the Game Time Picks? It kind of factors in all of that into the equation. Like, yes, this is a great seat, or this is good bang for your buck. It's just going to give you the best value option, which is really cool, I think. What's awesome about Game Time, the price you see, that's the price you pay. They've got the best event cancellation protection, the lowest price guarantee, so you know that you're getting the best deal around. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I also would like to shout out our friends at Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you, like the all-new 2024 Tacoma or the return of the iconic Land Cruiser. They've got 17 models with all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the 4Runner. They also have more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota, a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right. CSU, man, pulled off the 77-55 win over Air Force. Continues what's been a nice stretch against the Falcons in the Medved era. Now 13-1 against Air Force under Nico Medved. 6-0 against the Falcons on the road. So they've really taken care of business in Colorado Springs. But I mean, we all know the Falcons have been kind of a pain in CSU's ass these last couple of years. They took us to overtime twice in Fort Collins, won one of them. So it's at times been a bit of a shaky matchup for whatever reason. Air Force seems to punch up a little bit. I'm sure they take pride in, trying to play spoilers for the team that, gets all the recognition within the state. I think it's very similar when you play a team like UNC or DU. They know that CSU and CU are the teams that are getting all the love, getting all the attention. They'd love to play spoilers. They're really disciplined, so whenever I try and get them to admit it, it'll never happen. I've tried to get multiple Air Force football players or basketball players to admit it over the years. Service Academy men, it's smart. You would assume that they're pretty well versed in media training and all that, not saying dumb things. It's part of the fun though of playing a team like them. I've talked about how I won't really miss playing Air Force all that much post Mountain West, and I really don't think Air Force is going to miss CSU that much either. It's funny, in the DNVR Discord, there's constant debates, amongst Air Force fans versus the rest of the league. Like, we've got Boise fans in there, Wyoming fans in there, CSU fans in there, and we've obviously seen what Troy Calhoun has established, in that program and the success that they've had. And, comparably to the rest of the league, it's been pretty dang good. Air Force fans, they really only care about that Commander-in-Chief trophy, and they've only won it like 3 times under Calhoun. So they're frustrated because they never win the rivalry games. Sound familiar? But my point here is that while it is an in-state matchup, I don't know if it's ever truly been a rivalry that either side really cares about all that much. Like CSU, we've got bigger fish to fry, in Wyoming and CU and Air Force. Same deal with the other service academy matchups. But it's obviously been fairly competitive. They've dominated the football side. We've dominated the basketball side. It will be weird when we no longer play them anymore. But at the same time, it'll be nice to not have to deal with the wonkiness of, playing on the academy. And it's hard for the fans to get in there sometimes. Like there's a lot of weird stuff, despite the fact that it's an in-state game. It's really not that convenient of a process for the fans. Obviously, like I said at the beginning of the show, I was on the Western Slope for some family obligations, so I wasn't able to make it to the Springs. But it did seem like there was a solid contingent there for CSU. Moby South at this point, which you love to see. A ton of fans there for Nate Clifford, which makes sense. A homecoming for him. Grew up in the Springs. It early on, it looked like it could be another matchup like the last couple of years where it's like, oh man, is this going to overtime, or potentially even worse? Is this a game we could end up dropping, which would be absolutely devastating. But much like in the first matchup, a one possession game at halftime ended up being a 20-point win in the end. And the Rams now in 2 games against Air Force, plus 40 in the second half. So I've really adjusted well. And, after Air Force was able to hang around for a little bit, the disparity in depth in the end has proved to be too much, which is kind of what you would expect to happen. I will say, like, the slow starts are a little bit alarming at times. But they have handled their business here. They've got 5 sweeps against the teams in the bottom half of the league. Really have done a good job since New Year's of beating the teams they should beat, occasionally punching up, pulling a big win like San Diego State, Boise State. Hoping for a couple more here down the stretch with Utah State coming to town, and then the trip to Boise. We'll talk about, what could happen depending on how CSU fares and all that. But because you won this game, and because Utah State then lost on the road to Boise State last night, at the moment at least, you're 1 game out of first place. You're a half game out of second place with an opportunity to surpass Utah State. CSU, in terms of the tiebreakers, like they would lose some of them, and we'll get into all that. But it's fun to even be in this possibility after where this team started. Like, to think that they would have a chance to go 16-4 potentially in the league slate after at one point looking like a team that might not win 15 games all year period is pretty significant. I know the Mountain West isn't quite as deep as it's been the last couple of years, but it's still going to be a multi-bid league, probably 3, potentially 2, depending on who ends up being the teams that, finish on the right note here. But this team is top 3 in offensive and defensive efficiency in the Mountain West, and they're chugging along here. It's been pretty consistent basketball for about 2 months. Again, like the first half, it's ugly. You've got way too many turnovers. Offensively, it was a struggle. If it wasn't for Jalen Lake and Jalen Crocker-Johnson combining for like 17 points in that first half, they're probably down multiple possessions. Like it did not look great early, but they figured it out in the second half, and really they have been great in the second halves for a pretty extended stretch now. I was going through the box scores, and not only are they plus 40 in the second halves of the 2 games against Air Force, but CSU's actually won the second half in 6 straight games now. They got kind of throttled in that second half in Albuquerque. But since then, plus 20 against Air Force, plus 7 against UNLV, plus 11 against Nevada, plus 10 against Wyoming, plus 7 against Utah State, and plus 2 against San Diego State. They're really closing games strong. And of late, Kyan Evans, man, when he gets it going in the second half, like it makes this team look like a completely different group. Like all of a sudden, they feel like a team like the last couple of years where it's why couldn't they make a run in the NCAA tournament if they were able to get there? And Kyan Evans, 32 points in 31 minutes in the second half of the last 2 wins. It'd be nice for him to get it rolling a little bit earlier. I got in foul trouble 2 games ago. I just missed some shots early on in this one. But he doesn't let it deter his confidence. And the more I see from him as this season goes on, the more I'm inclined to believe this kid can be a legitimate superstar. Like, I really think he can carry on that tradition of David Roddy and Isaiah Stevens being the next great homegrown star that, starts his career and gets to play early and ultimately ends up, going on to like the NBA or something greater. I think the sky's the limit for him at this point. He's a nasty scorer. Like, we knew he has the ability to shoot the hell out of the basketball. Like, he's been CSU's most consistent 3-point shooter for 2 months now. He's got great range. There's an good Lord, effortlessness to his game. I still don't think I said that right. He makes it look easy. Let's just say it that way. I did not make that look easy, but he makes it look easy out there. But then when he decides to put the ball on the floor, like he had Air Force on skates all night long, and some of those drives to the hoop were just nasty. And it was fun to watch because you could tell he was toying with him. After he burned the dude the first or second time, I think it was Bo Becker that was on him. Speaking of Bo Becker, I don't know what's happened with him. He was like one of their leading scorers last year, hardly plays at all this year. Weird career trajectory. But once Cayenne figured that like this guy can't guard me, he was just toying with him out there, and he was getting to the hoop. Had a monster second half, just like he did the game before. 18 points in the second half, 7 and 9 from the floor, 2 of 4 from deep, 2 of 2 at the line in 15 minutes. Like I said, he has 32 points in just 31 minutes in the second halves of the last 2 games. 10 of 15 from the floor, shooting 50% from 3-point in that stretch. Just unreal offensive production. And to get this type of consistency from a true sophomore, again, that's why I start to think of, why can't he be the next, David Roddy or Isaiah Stevens type? Obviously, those guys have incredible legacies, and I'm always going to be hesitant to compare anybody to them. But in terms of skill and talent and what they could be, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, there's a reason he was a Gatorade Player of the Year in Missouri. I feel like he got under-recruited, and it worked out really well for CSU. I think Cayenne being patient enough to be a true freshman and learn under Isaiah Stevens was huge for him. I think he'll probably benefit greatly for it in his career. But this year, after having, some lumps early on in the process, like we have just seen him take his game to a new level. And the consistency with which he's scoring right now and in the places he's doing it, it's huge. Like he's probably been their most consistently lethal shooter, especially on the road. Like some of his best offensive showings shooting the ball have been in places like San Diego State and New Mexico and Utah State. Like he's just putting up monster numbers right now. And I don't know if he's going to score 18 points in every second half, but like if he's a guy that can consistently give you double digits with what you're getting from Neek Clifford on a nightly basis, and it wasn't Neek's best offensive showing. 5 of 15 from the floor at a couple of turnovers. He got called for multiple travels, which was definitely uncharacteristic. But even in a quote unquote off night for Neek Clifford, he still finishes with 9 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 blocks, and 2 steals. Pretty solid. But if you can get double digits out of 2 out of 3, Jalen Lake, Neek Clifford, and Cayenne Evans most nights, this team is going to be in a pretty good chance to win. And they're basically getting that every game. And when they're able to get all 3 rolling, it makes this team feel as dangerous as anybody in the league. And it's just been really fun to watch a kid like Cayenne get an opportunity to grow. It feels a little less common these days. It reminds me a little bit more of the college basketball that, I grew up with, and maybe I romanticize to an extent at this point. But, that was kind of part of the process of being a fan back in the day, was you'd see this kid that the school would sign and you'd be excited about what he could be. And, you see the potential, you see him flash early on, and then they find consistency along the way. And then, the hope is to really see them ascend and take off. And Cayenne is doing that. Like I have no reason to believe at this point he couldn't be a 20-point a game type scorer, especially on a higher volume. We've talked about that before. Like there's going to be more shots. When Neek is out of the picture, the ball's going to be in his hands a lot more too. I really do feel like the sky's the limit for this kid. And he was a monster against Air Force. Huge performance, great to see. And if he can carry this into these next couple of weeks, I just think it greatly elevates CSU's ceiling as a team, because all of a sudden you can't sag off of him. You know, he's got such great range, and you can't key in on everybody. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to double Neat Clifford? All right, well, now you're going to give Jalen Lake and Kyan Evans a bunch of space at the perimeter. You want to lock in on them? Well, now we're going to, try and get some post touches to Bemba and Jalen Crocker Johnson. And Neek and Kyan especially have a great ability to put the ball on the floor and get to the hoop. But I mean, we saw a little bit with Lake even. It was great to see him hit some threes, but I love that he put the ball on the floor a couple of times and made some of those patented floaters that he's had the last couple of years. I think I talked about that after the Wyoming game. Those aren't bad shots for people like him. That's a high percentage look for him. Same deal with like a Neat Clifford mid-range. I know that what the analytics say, it's not a shot that a lot of teams are emphasizing, but sometimes you've just got to be able to get a bucket. And right now you've got two guys in Kyan and Neek who can pretty much get one anytime that they want. And you're getting consistent production out of Crocker Johnson and Bemba and Lake and everybody else. The rotation tends to play better at home than they do on the road, which is just kind of par for the course in college basketball. But, as my guy Steve Ivey's saying here in the comment section in the Toyota chat, Kyan is a 15-5 guy in the future. I mean, he's close to it right now with what he's doing in league play. I think it's like 12-4 or whatever he's at in league play. So he's been huge. He was a monster in this game. We're going to keep talking about this. Stay rocking with us. If you got any questions, comments, keep them firing, and I'll get to as many as I can. I do got to shout out a couple of other partners real quick before we keep the party rolling, starting with our friends over at Coors Light. Mountain Cold Refreshment. They encourage you to choose chill. It's been increasingly hard to choose chill over the last year. I'm not going to lie, guys. It's been a lot. Had a lot going on in the professional life, a lot going on in the personal life, family stuff, just hardships. Honestly, it's been hard. It's been tiring, and I've been doing my best to rise above it. Trying to do the little things, get exercise. Do my deep breaths, focus on the little things. But you don't want life to drag you down, and you don't want to be a bummer, and you don't want to take things out on people that don't deserve it. And that's a big point of emphasis for me. Don't let my mess become other people's mess. I want to be a chill guy. I want to have a chill state of mind, and I want people to feel chill when I'm around. So choose chill, rise above. After you do, crack open an ice cold Coors Light. When the mountains turn blue, it's as cold as the Rockies, cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Choose chill this winter, then reach for a Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door by visiting CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. If you did not know, you can watch DNVR on your TV. That's right, Mama. I made it. I'm on the TV. We are on Samsung channel 2348, Xfinity channel 4072. We're on Xumo Play, and more to come. All you got to do is search DNVR Sports in your remote. If you got a microphone function, just say it. Otherwise, type it up, go old school. If you are watching on a TV, snap a picture, send it to inthewild@thednvr.com. We'll feature submissions live and pick some lucky winners for some free merch. Check it out. Stream us on your TV. All right, where were we before the break? We were talking about Kyan Evans, Neek Clifford, Jalen Lake. The Jalen's in particular were so big in that first half. Obviously, Kyan going off for 18 second half points. That was great to see. He's kind of turning into like the closer, if you will. I mean, him and Neek, it's kind of a tag team deal. But just inherently with the way the offense works, like Jalen Lake's going to get good shots from the perimeter from guys driving and kicking out. And he's got to be able to knock them down with some consistency. And he had a great start to the year. Really him and Neek early on were handling basically all the offensive production. Kyan has really ascended as the year has gone on. We've seen guys like Jalen Crocker Johnson get more comfortable as well. But to me, what you're going to get out of Neat Clifford most nights on both ends of the floor. At this point, I'm pretty confident that Kyan's going to give you 12 plus, hit a couple of threes. Like, he's going to do his thing. If you can get that 12 to 15 from Jalen Lake too, on top of, you're going to probably get 20 and 10, between Bemba and Croc in the post. And then basically anything other than that, it's just kind of gravy from the rotation. With what you do defensively and with how well you've been rebounding, you're going to be right there in all the games. Like, you're doing the little things well, but they're becoming a more overwhelming offensive team for opponents to scheme up for. Like, before it was just, we're just going to double Neek, dare anybody else to beat us. You can't do that with this team anymore, and it's huge, and it's a big reason why they've been so successful in the league. Like, not only do they have a legitimate superstar and an NBA talent in Neek Clifford, and not only do they have a future star in Kyan Evans, but they've got depth in the rotation, and they've got some versatility with, how they can play guys depending on who's in foul trouble and who's out there, and, who's running the floor at the moment. You can bring somebody like Bowen Bourne off the bench or Keyshawn Williams to run the floor. If somebody like Kyan is in foul trouble, and know that you're going to be able to get some good shots, it's a lot of fun to watch this team because everybody kind of understands what their intended purpose on the floor is. Like, Bowen needs to stretch the floor. He's actually been one of the better facilitators on the team too. He's a guy that can get you a good look, get guys quality shots in rhythm. Keyshawn, more of a, I'm going to come in and score. Like, he brings a spark, brings a little bit of pace and tempo that maybe nobody else plays with. He'll attack the hoop. He's certainly fearless. Now they're playing Japa. Seems like Japa has earned a spot in the rotation. Part of that probably has to do with Jorgensen battling some injuries, but I think it's smart to be able to depend on them both, get them both a little bit of playing time, because you want to develop both those guys. And on top of that, while you're really excited about the possibility for what they can be, they definitely have some room to grow on the defensive side, and having those 10 fouls to give out between the two, that's going to benefit you. And I like that everybody has figured out their spot in the rotation, because early on in the year, it just felt like we were trying to put some squares through the holes, and it just was not working out. It took some lumps along the way, and it sucks that they had such a really brutal month there from like mid-November to mid-December. There are so many losses along the way that you look back on and can say, well, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I mean, UC Riverside is the obvious one. That's a Q3 loss at home. That's devastating. I mean, you don't have that on your resume. That's a significant blemish, but I mean, there were multiple. You're beating Washington by 7 in a neutral site, and you let it slip away. That'd be a Q2 game. Kevin Lytle had a great piece kind of going through all this, I believe yesterday, this morning. I don't remember when I read it. But he kind of, talked about that. Like, as of now, CSU know they're not an NCAA tournament team, despite the success that they've had in the Mountain West, because your resume is all encompassing. It includes what happened in the non-con, and obviously that was a bummer. You let the Washington game get away. You let the VCU game slip away. You'd love to play CU again, at least show up. Like, I think back to some of those games, and it's killer, especially if they end up just on the outside looking in. There will be a lot of that. Like, man, just what if? But I also think that it's been pretty cool to see this team not throw in the towel, to see them work through their struggles and figure it out. I've had a lot of fun covering this team. I think it's a lot of good guys. I think there's a lot of cool stories of redemption. And at this point, it's kind of playing with house money, because you were picked to finish 7th. Come around Christmas, like I said, we probably would have been like, man, I hope they can even finish above 500. And now you're in a spot where you could potentially win 16 league games. You're going to win 20 plus games, likely, again, for I think like the 5th time in 7 years. That's huge. And yes, I wish they would have started sooner, especially with where they're at right now. But it does feel like this team is hot at the right time. And I do think when you're top 3 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, like, you're going to have a real opportunity to make some noise in the Mountain West tournament, especially if you keep doing what you're doing. Like, I do want to see them start some games a little bit faster. The sluggish starts offensively, it just kind of feels like they're maybe not super locked in. I don't know if that's immaturity or what. And then they figure it out, like, to their credit. Like we said, they've won the second half in 6 straight games, significantly in some of those matchups. it feels like they do a good job of taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. The points off of turnovers, especially in some of these road wins, has been a really big factor. Yes, you've turned the ball over too much yourself, but you're playing well enough defensively and you're creating opportunities for yourself in the transition game the other way that it's kind of offsetting some of that. They're doing the little things, man. They're doing the little things. You had 21 points off 19 Air Force turnovers. They were plus 14 in that stat in the second half. So really pulled away. And it starts on the defensive side, but obviously they were pretty overwhelming offensively as well. 1.5 points per possession in that second half. 22 scores on 32 possessions. I mean, those are all great. And what I also loved was, you shoot the ball better at home. That's pretty consistent in college basketball. Not shooting the three ball super well in the first half, did fall a little bit better in the second half, but they didn't just keep jacking up threes. Like, one of the things that stood out to me in New Mexico's loss to San Diego State was San Diego State really got New Mexico out of a rhythm offensively. New Mexico was not able to get the same penetration that they typically do in the paint. They were settling for so many outside jumpers. I think they shot like 28 threes. That's not their game. But CSU, most nights, if the threes aren't falling, then they find a different way to score. They start attacking the hoop. They do a great job of getting to the free throw line. A lot of that has to do with having tremendous athletes and ball handlers. Kyan Evans and Nate Clifford, like, those guys do a great job of being able to get basically wherever they want. They're able to create good looks for themselves anywhere on the floor. But I like that this team is savvy enough to understand that the threes aren't falling. Let's get to the hoop. And when more than half of your field goal makes are in the paint and you have guys that can stretch the floor, like, you're going to be in a really good spot. I know I sound like a coach right now and I'm, preaching some cliches. Love the paint like the three. Medved says it all the time, but it's huge. Like, it's a sustainable way to win. And to have 15 to 28 field goals come in the paint in this win between 13 layups and 2 dunks, like, I just really thought the offensive mentality was tremendous. The shot making needed to be better in the first half. Certainly turned the ball over far too many times, and it's a big factor for CSU. Like, I believe UC Riverside's the only game this year they've lost when they've had less than 11 turnovers. They're like one game above 500 when they commit more. After this, they were 500 before that, so it is going to be a big factor for them. They can't continue to have these games, especially if they want to win the Mountain West tournament or make a run here down the stretch, where you're having 14, 15 giveaways against a better team. That'll probably come back to kill you. It hasn't in some of these games like UNLV and Air Force, but I like the direction and I like where we're at. There's no guarantees, and like I said, you could potentially finish as high as second or as low as fifth. But right now, based on what's happened, you're sitting there just one game out of first place after getting swept by New Mexico. Neither the 2 or the 3 seed, Utah State or CSU, can beat New Mexico when it comes down to tiebreakers. And that's where all of this gets kind of interesting. I was going through some of the various scenarios, and right now you got New Mexico, they're in first place. Their 3 remaining games are Air Force, Nevada, and UNLV. Utah State in second place. They come to CSU off of that Boise State loss, and they host Air Force. They only have 2 games remaining. CSU, they got Utah State and San Jose State at home. Really need to win those matchups before playing a big game in Boise, which could potentially be massive depending on where they're at. Boise, they're in 4th at the moment. They go to Fresno and Air Force. You can't overlook anyone, but you're going to assume that they win those games, and it'll be, I think, 14-5, like, going into that CSU game. And then San Diego State, they're currently in 5th. Deceptively kind of a hard finish for San Diego State here. They go to Wyoming, to UNLV, and then they play Nevada. None of those teams are good, but Wyoming and UNLV historically have been kind of wonky road trips at times for San Diego State. And then Nevada, the game's at home, so you feel pretty good, but you just never know which Nevada is going to show up. Like, their lack of consistency this season has been really confusing to me, given the talent that they have. But like I said at the beginning, you have an opportunity here for, very realistically, for Utah State, CSU, Boise, and San Diego State to all finish at 15-5 in the league. Where that gets a little bit worrisome if CSU doesn't win out is Utah State, they likely, I mean, depending on how it all pans out, like they can't beat New Mexico in tiebreakers either. But Boise State and San Diego State, they split against the Lobos. And the tiebreaker, if you're all 15-5, it's going to be the record, against the top teams. And that's where that could get kind of wonky for us, is you're sitting here hoping for a top 2 or a top 3 finish right now. If all these teams finish 15-5, depending on, who beats who here down the stretch, there's a world in which, Boise they can technically still win the league. So could San Diego State. But they could also potentially jump CSU in the standings because of that split against New Mexico. And now all of a sudden, like that game in Boise, if you win these next 2, could be like the winner gets the 2 seed, or Boise potentially ties with New Mexico for a conference title, and the loser finishes like 4th or 5th. Obviously, you've already split against San Diego State, so you can't lose to them in that regard, but they split against New Mexico and you didn't. So things could get kind of wonky here for Utah State and CSU. Both kind of really need to win out in order to, just not make things difficult on themselves. And winning these final 3 would be a tough proposition for sure. Utah State's a great offensive team. We've seen that. They never really got in a rhythm against Boise last night. Boise did a great job. They're also a lot better on their home floor. It's really the case for all these teams. I really want to see this team finish top 3. And I know that's asking for a lot at this point. And the tiebreaker scenarios don't really favor CSU right now. If all these teams end up being 15-5, there's a pretty good chance that you're in the 4-5 matchup at that point, and then you're on the same side of the bracket as the 1 seed, which we would really like to avoid, because obviously that New Mexico matchup, it just doesn't really favor the Rams. It's a little bit of a mismatch for them. You never say never. It's hard to beat the same team 3 times, yada, 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 all the cliches you hear. But obviously, if you could, you would like to avoid playing New Mexico until at very minimum the title game. And while you're not an NCAA tournament team at the moment, you do have an opportunity here to pick up a couple of more significant wins. Like, that's really the biggest thing holding CSU back. And one of the things that Kevin focused on in his article this morning, which was, it's not really outside of UC Riverside. It's not really like they have a ton of catastrophic losses along the way. They've more or less taken care of business here in the league slate. They don't have a ton of quality wins. Like, you got San Diego State and you've got Boise State at home. Those are solid. But if you could get Utah State here, get another Q2 win, if you can go on the road and beat Boise State, now all of a sudden you're a lot closer to the bubble. And then you go to Vegas, you win game 1. Probably not going to do a ton for you in that first matchup. But if you then get another quality win over, say, a San Diego State, or obviously in New Mexico, or whatever, if you can beat one of these other top 5 teams, you've got an opportunity here to potentially pick up, 3-4 more Q2 at least type wins. And I think at that point, even without winning the Mountain West tournament, well, I do think you'd be holding your breath and probably praying for like an opportunity to go back to Dayton. I don't think it's impossible. I really don't, especially if you could get some help along the way. Like, again, I'm not saying expect to go to the NCAA tournament. If the season were to end today, they would be on the outside looking in pretty substantially. But the season doesn't end today. And this team is playing its best basketball of the season. You've got 2 out of your final 3 at home. And then you go to Boise, which is a tough place. They are really good in their home building, as is San Diego State, as is Utah State, as is New Mexico, as is CSU. Everybody is good in their home building. But it is a place the Rams have won twice under Nico Medved. I always think back to that 2022 game, which was a blast. Super Bowl Sunday, a huge win. They beat them in 2019 on the road. That one was less expected. But it is a place you've won a couple of times. And, Medved has taken this team in league play, especially. They haven't had a ton of success on the road against CU, but in league play, like he's gone into Laramie and pulled off big wins. He's gone into Logan and pulled off a couple of wins. I think they only have one win in Albuquerque and San Diego State, respectively, but they have a couple in Boise. Like they have multiple in Reno. They've been a team that over the last couple of years has been able to go out and pick a top team off, away from their home building. So I wouldn't count CSU out at this point. That's all I'm saying. Like, yes, it's a long shot. Yes, they're going to have to really finish hot here and continue some of this momentum that they've established of late. But I see all these bracketologists and, they're constantly talking about Utah State and San Diego State and all these other teams being locked, Boise being on the bubble. And it just cracks me up. I saw somebody referencing the remaining schedule specifically, and they're like, well, Utah State, if they get the win on Saturday, and Boise State, if they win out, basically locks. I'm like, well, that's a whole lot of assuming that CSU is going to lose both of those games based on what we've seen from the Rams of late. I like our chances, man. I like our chances here down the stretch. I like where this team is at. I like that they're getting consistent production across the board. I will say, hopefully Bemba's okay. He only played 1 minute in that second half, which was definitely alarming because the impact with him on the floor versus off the floor over the last couple of years it's kind of night and day. This team is significantly better when he's in the lineup. They win a lot when he's able to play 20 plus minutes. Steve Ivey, our friend of the show, had a great stat about that. I don't have it off the top of my head. If he's still listening, maybe he can throw it in the Toyota chat. But the difference between Bemba being out there or not, I do think would be the difference of realistically expecting to have an opportunity to win in Vegas or not. I mean, you could always outscore everybody and just get really hot from the perimeter, but I think having that presence in the post, offensively and defensively, like he gives us our best shot defensively. Like Crocker Johnson's grown, but Japa, Jorgensen, they struggle in the post defensively, and they're young. That's part of the process. Like it's to be expected. One of the benefits for Bemba is, despite the fact that he's only a sophomore, he's been playing pro ball in Austria for years. That dude's been playing grown men since he was like 15 years old. He's got the Roddy body type. There's always the jokes about him being, diet David Roddy out there, and they do very much look like each other in uniform, and just the bigger body type. Like I get the comparisons, but he just, especially against the teams like San Diego State and New Mexico and Boise, even with like Degenhart and some of the size they have in the post, I think we're going to need that physicality in order to survive the gauntlet here. I mean, somebody could really step up and surprise us. Maybe Morton's able to pick up some of that slack there defensively, but it's not like, he's a true rim protector either. They don't have a rim protector really on the teams because they just don't have that type of guy. Maybe Japa could be one down the line, but he's got to learn how to defend guys with their back to the basket. I was joking. Kevin Lytle and I were joking the other night, and we were like, I think I might be able to pull off a spin move on the post and score on him, or at least get fouled. But that tongue in cheek, obviously. Don't actually think that. I think he would swat the shit out of my shot, but he's got to learn how to defend guys in the post when they play with their back to the basket on him. Picks up a lot of fouls in those instances. Jorgensen, if he's healthy, he's showed I think his positioning is pretty good. It's just dealing with the physicality and the strength of some of these older guys. And again, that's going to be a learning process for this team. But if Japa isn't able to, if Bemba isn't able to go consistently, I fear it'll be a pretty drastic impact on this team down the stretch here. As Steve says in the Toyota chat, I think it's CSU is 23-4 when Rashawn plays 15 or more minutes. So pretty stark difference there. Very clearly need him in the lineup. As far as Nico, 7 points, 3 of 7 from the floor, and that was only in the second half. Let me pull back the full box score. Nick finished with 11 points, 9 rebounds. He's not going to go 5 of 15 from the floor very often. There have been some critics of his that have pointed out that in some of the bigger moments he has come up short this year. To me, it's nitpicking, and like if you're digging that deep trying to poke holes in what Neek's done, you're kind of choosing to look through a negative outlook. But I will contend that he at times can press things when he wants it too much, just tries to do a little bit too much. I think we saw it in both games against New Mexico. I think we saw it against CU. I think we saw it a little bit in the first half here in Colorado Springs. And I'm sure that he wanted it really bad. You know, that you've got a whole fan club there. He's playing in front of family and friends. Last opportunity in the Springs. He wants to go out with a bang. But I also thought he really settled in as the game went on. And I thought it was a testament to his maturity that it was a night where it wasn't firing on all cylinders, but he didn't just jack up 20 shots hoping to shoot his way out of it. You know, he 2 of 8 in the first half, 3 of 7 in the second half. But again, he had 4 rebounds and 3 assists. He also had a couple of blocks, a couple of assists. Like his impact on both ends of the floor is just so tremendous. And San Diego State, you know, they were sharing a stat the other day about like their players, you know, how having like a 15 point, I don't remember the exact stat, but it was more or less like 15 points, you know, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, or whatever it was, whatever along those lines. Like, man, a San Diego State guard has only done this once in the last decade. You look back and Neek's done it like 6, 7 times this year. He's been so huge for this program. He's had a great year. He did not have his best offensive showing in this one, but I'm not worried about it at all because basically every time this has happened this year, and he's had a night where didn't quite have it scoring, he's followed it up with a pretty monster performance. So I think the indications are that he should have a pretty good game against Utah State on Saturday. Excited to see what happens in this one. Certainly a huge opportunity. Should be a great crowd in Fort Collins. Hope to see CSU fans turn out in a major way. The weather's supposed to be nice. You got 2 of the top 3 teams in the league. Like this is the type of game where you need your home court to make an advantage. And I assume the students will show up Saturday, 2 p.m. Like, really, what else are you going to be doing? I like that. Sometimes it's harder to get people, the students, especially on campus, for a Saturday night game just because they're young and they want to go party and do all the fun college stuff. I get it. But also it has been pretty cool to see the consistency with which the students have mostly showed up this year. Like the Nevada crowd was not tremendous, but other than that, you know, you think back to Wyoming and Boise and San Diego State, like they've really showed up and they've been invested. And I think that's really been true across the board since COVID. It's been cool to see the students and how active and how engaged they've been. You know, like I think Utah State's got the most impactful student section, but I think CSU's probably up, at least in the conversation, for number 2. It's not as intense of a crowd as like New Mexico and the Pit, but New Mexico is more about the alumni than the students, and CSU is more about the students than the alumni in terms of the atmosphere. Typically, just with where the students sit and all that, and there it is a little bit of an older crowd that tends to make up the CSU sections outside of the students. So big matchup coming up this weekend. Hopefully you're able to see the Rams pull it off. If they do, it sets up a really interesting final week going into the Mountain West tournament there. I would love to see Jalen Lake build off of what he did in this win against Air Force, shoot the ball with some consistency. He finished 6 of 10 from the floor, 3 of 6 from deep. Obviously, you assume Neek's going to do his thing. I mean, Jalen Crocker-Johnson, another solid game. We really didn't talk enough about him in this. 13 points, 4 of 5 from the floor, 5 of 6 at the free throw line. That's a really underrated part of his game, by the way. Shooting the ball as well as he does at the charity stripe, as well as the 3-point line. He's a really versatile, extremely high ceiling type guy that I think if you can keep him and Cayenne and Bemba, like that is a really intriguing trio to build around. And then obviously you hope, you know, Jorgensen and Joppa and some of these other guys can take a leap. You go to the portal, get a veteran wing or 2, and we'll see what's happening. But an opportunity here to make a little bit of magic down the stretch. And I'm really excited to see how it all plays out. I will be there on Saturday, as I believe will my guy RG, Ryan Green. Really looking forward to that. If you missed it, I am going to be speaking at CSU Business Day on March 25th. You can register. It's a free event. Sonny Lubick speaking before me, which is probably a much better selling point, but I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity. That's all I've got for you guys this morning. We'll be back tomorrow morning as well, kind of previewing that Utah State matchup. Shout out to everybody. I appreciate the support so much. You guys make all my dreams come true. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.